You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Friday, the 7th of March 2014. Minister staff in spotlight after Tory James Brockenshire says wealthy elites' demand for cheap labour fuelling immigration. Bank of England suspends worker in probe into foreign exchange rate fixing by traders. Algerian refugee sexually assaulted 8-year-old girl buying present for her mother. Borders around Ceuta and Melilla can to be strengthened as EU says it's concerned over country's response to immigrants. France, the rich flee Paris, frightened by Hollande's taxes. Nick Griffin MEP, today on Kiev and a corrupt police force. Toronto hubby disguised himself in burqa for honour killing. Boko Haram militant group kills 150 in Nigeria's northeastern state, causes military to flee. UN says west of Central African Republic cleansed of Muslims. Somalia's Al-Shabaab defeated in Rabduri town. Thought for the day, silence means assent. And finally, an ode to sign writers. UK News. Minister staff in spotlight after Tory James Brockenshire says wealthy elites' demand for cheap labour fuelling immigration. David Cameron and Nick Clegg have brushed off questions about their employment of foreign nannies after a Tory immigration minister suggested the wealthy metropolitan elite had been fuelling high immigration by demanding cheap labour. Downing Street suggested the nationality of Cameron's domestic staff was not relevant after James Brockenshire, a new Home Office minister, gave a speech arguing that well-off families and big business are the main beneficiaries of cheap tradesmen and other domestic labour. In his speech, Brockenshire said immigration was too high and suggested those who employ foreign labour have done well out of the situation for too long. Attention was turned to whether this argument implies people, including government ministers, are wrong to employ people from abroad. Cameron has employed Nepalese and Australian nannies to look after his children. Asked whether he still employs domestic staff from overseas, the Prime Minister's official spokesperson said, "I'm going to keep talking about government policy." Brockenshire's speech infuriated companies, with the Institute of Directors saying it was feeble and pathetic to use such divisive language. It has also caused coalition tensions, with Vince Cable, the business secretary, due to give a speech on Thursday night warning that those who want to bear down on immigration risk depriving the UK of valuable skills. World at 8. Valuable skills don't include looking after children. These people don't have the proper trained nannies they used to have. They have some Eastern European slapper on the cheap. This is encouraging grotty services. It isn't only the rich. A working couple I know have a Polish cleaner and say they couldn't do without it. Bunkum. Many women work and have to raise children and clean houses themselves. It doesn't kill you. It is all diversity speak. Bank of England suspends worker in probe into foreign exchange rate fixing by traders. A Bank of England employee has been suspended over claims the regulator knew that traders were trying to rig currency exchange rates. The UK's central bank has launched an inquiry into how much officials knew about the alleged manipulation of markets by city traders. It announced that one member of staff had been suspended from their job pending further investigation. The decision comes after bank officials examined 15,000 emails, 40 hours of telephone conversations and 21,000 instant messages sent and received by its workers. Algerian sexually assaulted 8-year-old girl buying present for her mother. An Algerian asylum seeker who abducted and sexually assaulted an 8-year-old girl as she bought a secret gift for her mother at Madame Tussauds was jailed for 13 years. Oud Count Belabas, 42, kissed the schoolgirl on the cheek and led her to an alcove which was out of sight of CCTV cameras, Southwark Crown Court heard. He pinned her in the corner and touched her through her t-shirt before a group of Venezuelan tourists disturbed him, leaving the distressed girl to run back to her mother, who was waiting in the coffee shop. Belabas, who is unemployed and homeless, had been stalking the shop looking for potential victims. The victim asked her mother whether she could go into the gift shop and did not tell her why, because she wanted to keep the present a secret. Prosecutor Leslie Jones told the court that the girl is now too afraid to sleep alone and has lost confidence. World at 8. Well, they can't say that this little mite led him on, can they? Or that she was vulnerable. Deport the bastard without his balls. European news. Borders around Ceuta and Melilla to be strengthened as EU says it is concerned over country's response to immigrants. Spain is to spend more than €2.3 million, that's £1.89 million, fortifying the borders that divide its territories of Ceuta and Melilla from Morocco, in an attempt to deter the thousands of migrants who arrive at the borders of its two enclaves in North Africa, the country's interior minister has announced. Reinforcements to be added in the coming weeks include lining the 6-metre high fences that surround both cities with the type of mesh meant to impede anyone from climbing, Jorge Fernandez Diaz told reporters. In Ceuta, an additional 20 Guardia Civil agents will be deployed and a helicopter will now help with the dissuasion and detection of migrants. In Melilla, the government will set up 3 watchtowers equipped with heat-sensitive cameras. The announcement comes as the Spanish government faces criticism from EU officials who have said they are very concerned over the country's response to sub-Saharan Africans and other immigrants who flock to the Spanish territories, desperately seeking better lives in Europe. Each year, thousands of Africans, many of whom have spent years travelling across North and Sub-Saharan Africa, try to gain entry into the EU either by swimming along the coast or climbing the 3 rows of fences lined with razor wire that mark the border between Morocco and the enclaves. World at 8. The EU is partly responsible for these migrants. Allow a few in and the rest will surely follow. The EU doesn't care if Spain or any other European country loses its money, culture and history to these Africans. It just doesn't care. Heat-sensitive cameras, guns is what they need, guns. France. The rich flee Paris, frightened by Hollande's taxes. Le Figaro. Property dumped on the market in chic neighbourhoods. An ever-growing number of Parisians are putting their properties and historic residences up for sale in the French capital, following the example of actor Gérard Depardieu and moving to Belgium or Switzerland to flee French taxes. Nearly a quarter of the new sales that have been entrusted to us between May 2012 and May 2013 for assets of more than €2 million are tied to translocations abroad. Charles-Marie Jotras, president of the Faux agency specialising in luxury real estate, told the French newspaper Le Figaro. The much gossiped about departure of Depardieu last year thus is not an isolated case. On the contrary, increased numbers are doing so, as did the actor, who decreed his divorce with France, moving his residence to Netchin, Belgium, and putting up for sale at an astronomical figure his immense and luxurious residence in the 6th arrondissement of Paris. France has become synonymous with tax hell, a real estate agent confided. The famous 75% tax on incomes over €1 million has frightened even those who are not directly affected, and comes in addition to many anti-rich speeches. Thus the number of grand properties, residences and apartments of more than 250 square metres are becoming more numerous on the market, noted the Conservative Daily. World at 8. What did they expect? They voted in a socialist government. And it ain't just the taxes the rich are fleeing, but the sodding Muslim immigrants. Belly of the Beast. I now hand you over to Nick Griffin, MEP, who talks today about Kiev and corrupt cops.
All the chatter in the European Parliament this week is, of course, about the crisis in Ukraine and the Crimea. Having been heavily involved in the push to destabilise Ukraine, to impose a most appalling liberal fascist hybrid coup d'etat thing on the place, the people running the EU are now saying, oh, it's all very dangerous. Well, yes, it is dangerous, and they started it, because of course there are genuine nationalists in that revolution, but they are being used by the usual suspects. It's all part of the neocon project for the new American century, which was unveiled at the turn of this century in the United States, and although the particular organisation that pushed it has since been closed down, having achieved its aims of war in Iraq, the overall campaign to remake the world on behalf of America and its bosses is still going on. A crucial part of that campaign, of course, was to encircle Russia, and that's what this attack on Ukraine is all about. The Russians are very nervous about this, and rightly so. When Germany was reunified, the Russians gave their consent on the basis that NATO would stay out of East Germany and also out of Poland. And yet there are now NATO missiles on the Russian border in Poland. No wonder Russia, after their history of being invaded so many times, is rather nervous of this, and it's why they're so concerned to maintain their traditional bases on the Black Sea, in Crimea and the eastern edge of Ukraine. That's what the trouble is really all about. On top of that, the Ukrainian nationalists stroke chauvinists have the most appalling, brutal record of massacring ethnic minorities. Towards the end of the Second World War, they murdered hundreds of thousands of Poles and Hungarians on the eastern side, and the Russians are not surprisingly concerned of the dangers to the Russian population who live as a minority, in fact in some areas as a majority, in eastern Ukraine. On top of that, Crimea was Russian. It's really always been Russian in modern and pre-modern times. It was given for some rather bizarre reason by Khrushchev to Ukraine as a sort of goodwill gesture, but it's Russian, it's part of Russian territory. The vast majority of the people there are Russian, speak Russian, and want to be with Russia. Now, despite their terrible massacres of the Poles and the Hungarians, I think most other Western real nationalists do have sympathy with the aspirations of the Ukrainians in the centre and the west of the country. They, of course, suffered more than almost anybody else in Eastern Europe at the hands of the Bolsheviks when the Holodomor, the murder of millions and millions of their people through Stalin's mass artificial famine, scarred and damaged that nation for many centuries in all probability. But for them to blame Russia, where Russians were the primary victims of the Bolshevik Revolution, which had very little Russian about it, very few Russians involved, really is most unfair, unjust, and in the long term very foolish. The Russians, as I say, were the victims of the Bolshevik Revolution, and Putin, in the way that Russia is headed back to being a Christian modern country, as something completely against and beyond that. So you can see where the Ukrainians are coming from, but really they're wrong, and they're particularly and terribly wrong to allow their legitimate aspirations for sovereignty and independence to be used and abused by the neocons, the Zionists, the EU elite and international capitalists as a way of giving problems to Putin and Russia. In the end, this is a matter of geopolitics, and there's also the principle of self-determination of peoples. The people of Crimea are Russian and want to be Russian, and the fact that old border decisions by elites have put them in effect on the wrong side of the border is neither here nor there. They want to be Russian, they should be Russian. That's self-determination. In this crisis, we see once again an enormous contrast between the status of Putin and the standing of Putin compared to the blustering coward Obama and the ridiculous pipsqueak Cameron and the would-be Field Marshal Haig. What a pitiful spectacle they make as they lecture Russia and threaten sanctions and tell Mr. Putin that he won't be able to go shopping in Paris if he doesn't behave himself. And he and Russia just do precisely what they want and ignore this because they know that the West in this basically is, as Chairman Mao would have said, a paper tiger. They need Russian gas, they need Russian oil. What does Russia get from us? It buys expensive cars. Well, push comes to shove, they can do without the cars from Germany and Britain, but the West can't do without their gas and oil. So, in the end, they'll get their way, and damn good luck to them as far as I'm concerned. You probably have heard that there's a referendum in Crimea next weekend. The results are foregone conclusion, despite the fact that Obama and Haig and all the rest are saying it's illegal. Well, they'll have their referendum, and because the vast majority want to become part of Russia, that's what they will decide. I'm hoping to be able to go as an independent observer, though, to see fair play, and if I do, then I may not be able to give a broadcast next week, but I'll certainly have some interesting stories to share with you the week after that. So, fingers crossed. Every time I go on one of these election monitoring operations, I push the organisers to come to the United Kingdom. They can, I think, scarcely believe what I tell them about the sheer level of corruption and fraud within the British electoral process these days. As was famously said by a judge several years ago, it would shame a banana republic. And he was talking about Birmingham, the second city of our poor, tortured country. And as I'm sure you know, if you've been involved in any elections on behalf of the British National Party, it's, if anything, worse than that. We had more this week. You'll probably remember the case in Maryport in Cumbria, where we last year took Labour on at their own postal vote game, and we increased our our percentage of the vote from 14% to 41%, with Dawn Charlton being a tremendous local candidate. Dawn only lost in that campaign by about 70 votes because more than 200 of our voters were denied the right to the vote because they either weren't sent their papers by the council, or having voted, scores and scores of them simply ended up being recorded as not having voted, their votes having been stolen. Crystal clear cases of electoral fraud. The police, however, took no action, and over the last few weeks have, as I think we've told you before, been bullying our 70 proxy voters, going round to their houses and saying, do you realise how extreme this party is you voted for? Did you know that you were voting for them? Surely you didn't mean to vote for them. And this sort of outrageous nonsense. Under all that pressure, though, just 2 of them said that they couldn't remember signing. As a result of that, a dozen stormtroopers arrested Dawn and ransacked her house. And this week they've made it also clear that not only is no action planned over the very real fraud of over 200 stolen votes directed against our people, but they're also planning to arrest Clive Jefferson in pursuit of this fictitious fraud operation which they've concocted a pitiful piece of non-evidence for by bullying elderly proxy voters. It really is shocking the level of the rotten corruption in the British police force connected to the British political elite. That, of course, has also been in the news this week, with a lot of stories about the London undercover officers having set out to smear the family of Stephen Lawrence. So we've had Baroness Lawrence again on the television. And yes, what those police did was wrong. Face the fact. You may not like, as I don't like, the way in which the Lawrence case, an individual tragedy, has been used to devastate colourblind policing in this country. You may be sickened by the contrast between the treatment of the Lawrence family, Baroness Lawrence, and of Charlene Downs' family, as I am. But what was done to that family by police squads was wrong. But that's only a little part of the story, and the really important part of the story of those undercover squads is the direct interference in democratic politics, including the infiltration and disruption of the British National Party over several decades. I was reading a book about this just the other day, and it emerges in that at the famous Battle of Welling outside the then BNP headquarters in southeast London, there were undercover police officers on both sides, including one inside the Welling bookshop, there to defend it, even though in fact he was a police officer. And of course he and his colleagues within the BNP were not there to defend, they were there actively to disrupt. It's been said by another one of these former police officers that once those people got into an organisation and started disrupting people, setting people against each other, the organisation was doomed. Well, they came and they clearly went. You know the kind of people they went off with all the fuss they caused a couple of years ago. I'm very glad we are to see the back of them. They came and they went, and we're still here. And as the emerging markets financial crisis gathers pace, as it's doing so, and as it's going to, and sweeps the West back into the next phase of the long crisis, the rise of radical nationalism that we're seeing in Greece will be followed elsewhere in Europe too, first of all across the south and then heading this way. I was in Rome last weekend speaking at a large meeting of Forza Nuova, our sister party in Italy, and there's some great pictures from that and a report coming out in the Next Freedom, which is off to the printers on Monday. So I'll leave that until you see it in the paper. But what I can tell you is that there was a fantastic spirit there, that there were nationalists from other countries, including Germany, where a change in the law means that they're now guaranteed at least one MEP, perhaps up to 3, in the elections coming up in May. And that whatever happens with nationalism, where sometimes we're pushed back for a bit by the sheer weight of the opposition thrown against us, the long-term trend is clear. Radical nationalism, of which the British National Party is a vital, integral part and highly respected as such all over Europe, radical nationalism is on the rise, and our time will come.
Thank you, Nick. As usual, thought-provoking for the weekend. And all our best from World at 8 to the new grandson. World News. Toronto hubby disguised himself in burqa for honour killing. A Muslim man wore a traditional woman's burqa and female shoes before he strangled his estranged wife in the company of their toddler son. Abdul Malik Rustam admitted he donned the headdress which disguised his face and wedge shoes when he killed his wife, Shahir Bano Shaddadi, after she asked for a divorce. Rustam, now 30, pleaded guilty on Valentine's Day to second-degree murder in the July 22, 2011 slaying. He will be sentenced Thursday by Justice John McMahon. World at 8. Wonder how his human rights will fare owing to his religious views. Will they go easy on him? Boko Haram militant group kills 150 in Nigeria's northeastern state, causes military to flee. The Islamist militant group Boko Haram has stepped up its attack efforts in Nigeria's northeastern state of Borno, reportedly killing 150 people over the weekend. A senator from Borno State said this week that the violence has become so unmanageable that soldiers flee with villagers when the militants arrive, as they are outnumbered and lack proper weapons to fight the militants. The intense violence took place over the weekend when Boko Haram militants swarmed 3 cities in the Borno state, killing a reported total of 150 from Friday to Sunday. Although Nigerian President Goodluck Jonathan has allowed the military extra power to curb the extremist group, recent reports indicate that Boko Haram's numbers have been too large for local military to sustain. UN says west of Central African Republic cleansed of Muslims. Most Muslims have been driven out of the western half of conflict-torn Central African Republic, where thousands of civilians risk being killed right before our eyes, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees said on Thursday. The bleak warning came as the country's foreign minister pleaded with the UN Security Council to urgently approve a UN peacekeeping force to stop the killing. Widespread violence in the former French colony has claimed thousands of lives since Seleka, a coalition of mostly Muslim northern rebels, seized power a year ago. Attacks intensified in December when anti-Balaka militias, drawn from the majority Christian population, stepped up reprisals on Muslims. Since early December we have effectively witnessed a cleansing of the majority of the Muslim population in Western CAR. UN High Commissioner for Refugees Antonio Guterres told a meeting of the 15-nation UN Security Council on the crisis in the impoverished and landlocked country. Tens of thousands of them, Muslims, have left the country, the second refugee outflow of the current crisis, and most of those remaining are under permanent threat, he said. The Council is considering a UN proposal for a nearly 12,000-man strong peacekeeping force to stop the country from sliding toward what a top UN rights official called ethnic religious cleansing. If approved, the UN force would likely not be operational before late summer. World at 8. Strange, isn't it, that ethnic religious cleansing only exists in the UN if it is against Muslims, while the almost unreported ethnic religious cleansings carried out by the Muslims is never mentioned or acted upon by the United Nations. Somalia's Al-Shabaab defeated in Rabduri town. Ethiopian and Somali government forces have seized a key town in central Somalia from the Islamist militant group Al-Shabaab, officials say. At least 12 people were killed in heavy fighting for control of Rabduri town in Bakool region. The attack may signal the start of a new offensive against Al-Shabaab, according to a BBC reporter in Somalia. Ethiopian troops are part of a 22,000-strong African Union force battling the militants in Somalia. The BBC's Mohamed Moalemu in the capital Mogadishu says the fall of Rabduri is significant as it was a major Al-Shabaab base for attacks across the region. It would be the first town the group has lost since September, when Mahadeh in central Somalia fell to AU-backed government forces. Thought for the day: Silence Means Assent by JLH. Now call me ignorant, but I don't know who JLH is apart from being a German translator, but his words are worth listening to. I have spoken about propaganda, and this is a form of anti-propaganda, and one which should be heard above all the yelling and media hype on some individuals or communities' human rights who have done nothing to deserve the term human. I sometimes think of Martin Niemöller's famous lines describing how Nazism stamped out a nation's decent impulses through intimidation, lies and fear. First they came for the communists, and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a communist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out for me. And I wonder how we should describe what has happened to us, how the best characteristics of a culture can be destroyed by the enemies within, who yearn to control and intimidate. And this is what I think. When they said we were warmongers, I said nothing, because I knew we had not been warmongers, and I thought everyone knew that. When they said we were racists, I said nothing, because I knew we were not racists, and thought everyone knew that. When they said we were Nazis, I said nothing and even smiled a little, because I knew we were not Nazis, and I thought everyone knew that. When they said we were selfish, I said nothing, because I knew we were the first truly generous nation in the history of the world, and I thought everyone knew that. And when they said that Constitution was outdated, I said nothing, because I knew that it was timeless and newer than all the morally bankrupt tyrannies that have risen up before and since, and I thought everyone knew that. And when I was done saying nothing, I found that I no longer had the freedom that had made me the luckiest citizen on the face of the earth. And no one knew or cared. A weekend thought should be given to the high-ranking army soldier who called for better manners in the officers' mess and the way the media handled it. He was right. There's nothing wrong with trying to hold on to standards. That word that went out with the British Standards Agency in the 80s. There are virtually no British or English standards now. Manners have gone, and with them all the organisational abilities that we used to as a nation possess. Masses of the middle classes now don't send Christmas cards or thank you letters, because if we are honest, most children might learn to type but can't write a letter. The high-tech world doesn't have the time or the inclination for being nice and polite. If it doesn't fit on YouTube, it ain't worth doing, and we don't have the time for it, do we? No, our time is spent either sitting on our asses in front of the TV or sitting on our asses drinking whilst communicating with mobile or tablet. Our youth, when not high on booze or drugs or Xboxing, and the furthest thing from their minds, are any members of their respective families. The working class, that backbone of England, has well and truly gone, vanished in the midst of owning homes and having holidays and all the techie things they either earn or get on benefits. The thought of sending letters or even a decent email is far from their minds. I texted him and he texted me and she texted him and I texted her and on and on. They don't vote Labour or BNP anymore, they vote UKIP, that bread and water sop handed out to babies that cannot stomach anything stronger. What you see now is the finalisation of a cultural reversal, where anyone, and I mean anyone, can now join the armed forces, the police, the civil service and the financial institutions. And I mean anyone from anywhere. No longer do we have city gents in reality, but a load of middle-class shysters and barrow boys. And the trouble is, they are in charge. I am in reality not a snob. I have standards which I am loath to forego, but snobbery is not my forte. However, I judge a man by his actions, not his accent, which gives me a certain leeway. I would rather have an honest East End barrow boy than a jumped-up get-rich-quick idiot who denied his roots. One should never be ashamed of their roots or their culture. It denotes who and what we are, and that is what is missing today. There's always been progress, and progress is good. However, we have not really progressed socially, we've gone back in years, but reversed the social structure to be almost unrecognisable. And this is the problem. We have a population who has not been trained to think beyond the tomorrow, and certainly not to be interested in aspects of the government of their country. There must be something in the water, because although we as a nation have always been slow to anger, there have been times in our past when we have upped and got rid of people we didn't want in this country. And now look at us, absolutely impotent in the places and positions that count. And this is deliberate social engineering, and it works. We in the British National Party stand alone, quite alone. We are not funded even behind the scenes like all the other so-called main parties. The cons are of course funded by the wealthy, that is old money, large corporations, financial houses and big business. Labour is funded by members of the Communist Party, unions and small business. Liberals are funded by all the above on a much less scale. Although UKIP cannot be called a main party, it is well funded by businesses and corporations who see themselves and UKIP as the thinking man's political party. Insofar you don't really have to think much at all. One particular splinter group are supposed to be funded from Northern Ireland, the Orange Men and the RUC, and yet call themselves Britain whatever. And the money the EDL used to have from the American pro-Zionists is, also according to rumours, happily in their pockets as well. But the one thing the establishment do not realise is that when a man has nothing to lose, he is more dangerous. And we are a leaner and meaner machine than before. And more importantly, we owe nothing to anybody. There is no hidden agenda from the BNP. We do what it says on the side of the tin and do not deny the instructions. We may not be polished, the accents are far from melodious in many cases, we can muddle up admin like no other, but we are honest and not funded by foreign investors for their own gain, like the main parties. The British National Party is WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. And finally, an ode to sign writers. Did I read that sign right? Toilet out of order, please use floor below. In a laundromat, automatic washing machines, please remove all your clothes when the light goes out. In a Memphis department store, bargain basement upstairs. In an office, would the person who took the stepladder yesterday please bring it back or further steps will be taken. In another office, after the coffee break, staff should empty the coffee pot and stand upside down on the draining board. Outside a second-hand shop, we exchange anything, bicycles, washing machines, etc. Why not bring your wife along and get a wonderful bargain? Notice in health food shop window, closed due to illness. Spotted in a safari park, elephants, please stay in your car. Seen during a conference. For anyone who has children and doesn't know it, there is a daycare on the first floor. Notice in a farmer's field. The farmer allows walkers to cross the field for free, but the bull charges. Messages on a leaflet. If you cannot read, this leaflet will tell you how to get lessons. On a repair shop door. We can repair anything. Please knock hard on the door. The bell doesn't work. A weekend laugh for all our listeners. You've been listening to The World at 8. I am Lynn Mozart and I and the team at World at 8 and Radio Britain wish you all a very happy, safe and dry weekend. The Prime Minister's official spokesperson said, "I'm going to keep talking about government policy." Brockenshire's speech infuriated companies, with the Institute of Directors saying it was feeble and pathetic to use such divisive language. It has also caused coalition tensions, with Vince Cable, the business secretary, due to give a speech on Thursday night warning that those who want to bear down on immigration risk depriving the UK of valuable skills. World at 8. Valuable skills don't include looking after children. These people don't have the proper trained nannies they used to have. They have some Eastern European slapper on the cheap. This is encouraging grotty services. It isn't only the rich. A working couple I know have a Polish cleaner and say they couldn't do without it. Bunkum. Many women work and have to raise children and clean houses themselves. It doesn't kill you. It is all diversity speak. Bank of England suspends worker in probe into foreign exchange rate fixing by traders. A Bank of England employee has been suspended over claims the regulator knew that traders were trying to rig currency exchange rates. The UK's central bank has launched an inquiry into how much officials knew about the alleged manipulation of markets by city traders. It announced that one member of staff had been suspended from their job pending further. UN says west of Central African Republic cleansed of Muslims. Somalia's Al-Shabaab defeated in Rabduri town. Thought for the day, silence means assent. And finally, an ode to sign writers. UK News. Minister staff in spotlight after Tory James Brockenshire says wealthy elites' demand for cheap labour fuelling immigration. David Cameron and Nick Clegg have brushed off questions about their employment of foreign nannies after a Tory immigration minister suggested the wealthy metropolitan elite have been fuelling high immigration by demanding cheap labour. Downing Street suggested the nationality of Cameron's domestic staff was not relevant after James Brockenshire, a new Home Office minister, gave a speech arguing that well-off families and big business are the main beneficiaries of cheap tradesmen and other domestic labour. In his speech, Brockenshire said immigration was too high and suggested those who employ foreign labour have done well out of the situation for too long. Attention was turned to whether this argument implies people, including government ministers, are wrong to employ people from abroad. Cameron has employed Nepalese and Australian nannies to look after his children. Asked whether he still employs domestic staff from overseas investigation. The decision comes after bank officials examined 15,000 emails, 40 hours of telephone conversations and 21,000 instant messages sent and received by its workers. Algerian sexually assaulted 8-year-old girl buying present for her mother. An Algerian asylum seeker who abducted and sexually assaulted an 8-year-old girl as she bought a secret gift for her mother at Madame Tussauds was jailed for 13 years. Oud Count Barabas, 42, kissed the schoolgirl on the cheek and led her to an alcove which was out of sight of CCTV cameras, Southwark Crown Court heard. He pinned her in the corner and touched her through her t-shirt before a group of Venezuelan tourists disturbed him, leaving the distressed girl to run back to her mother, who was waiting in the coffee shop. Barabas, who is unemployed and homeless, had been stalking the shop looking for potential victims. The victim asked her mother whether she could go into the gift shop and did not tell her why, because she wanted to keep the present a secret. Prosecutor Leslie Jones told the court that the girl is now too afraid to sleep alone and has lost confidence. World at 8. Well, they can't say that this little mite led him on, can they? Or that she was vulnerable. Deport the bastard without his balls. European news. Borders around Ceuta and Melilla to be strengthened as EU says it is concerned over country's response to immigrants. Spain is to spend more than €2.3 million, that's £1.89 million, fortifying the borders that divide its territories of Ceuta and Melilla from Morocco, in an attempt to deter the thousands of migrants who arrive at the borders of its two enclaves in North Africa, the country's interior minister has announced. Reinforcements to be added in the coming weeks include lining the 6-metre high fences that surround both cities with the type of mesh meant to impede anyone from climbing, Jorge Fernandez Diaz told reporters. In Ceuta, an additional 20 Guardia Civil agents will be deployed and a helicopter will now help with the dissuasion and detection of migrants. In Melilla, the government will set up 3 watchtowers equipped with heat-sensitive cameras. The announcement comes as the Spanish government faces criticism from EU officials who have said they are very concerned over the country's response to sub-Saharan Africans and other immigrants who flock to the Spanish territories, desperately seeking better lives in Europe. Each year, thousands of Africans, many of whom have spent years travelling across North and Sub-Saharan Africa, try to gain entry into the EU either by swimming along the coast or climbing the 3.
You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number 1 in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Friday, the 7th of March 2014. Minister staff in spotlight after Tory James Brockenshire says wealthy elites' demand for cheap labour fuelling immigration. Bank of England suspends worker in probe into foreign exchange rate fixing by traders. Algerian refugee sexually assaulted 8-year-old girl buying present for her mother. Borders around Ceuta and Melilla to be strengthened as EU says it's concerned over country's response to immigrants. France, the rich flee Paris, frightened by Hollande's taxes. Nick Griffin MEP, today on Kiev and a corrupt police force. Toronto hubby disguised himself in burqa for honour killing. Boko Haram militant group kills 150 in Nigeria's northeastern state, causes military to flee.